All right, hi everyone. We're going to talk about our very last story for Within the Walls, and it's a fun one to end with, I guess. It's called Maps and Ledgers, and it's written by John Edgar Wideman. He's actually a well-known author, but I hadn't heard of him, but he's published a lot. He's also a professor, which this is part of a collection of short stories that he published under the name American Histories. And it came out to a lot of acclaim. You can be the judge of it. But so we're going to talk about maps and ledgers today. And thank goodness this is our last story. So anyway, John Edgar Wideman. This is a picture of him, if I do this right. Here you go. You see him. This must be an old picture because he's 79 years old. So I don't think that's what he looks like now, but you know how they, take a picture of you when you're 50 and use that from now on. That's what I need to do, is put a picture of me when I was 50 and just do that, and I'll just talk in the background while you look at my picture. Anyway, parts of this story are actually autobiographical, and he mixes in a lot of that in all of his writings. Like parts of them are autobiographical, parts of them are fiction, and he just kind of blends everything together. And he did that with this picture, or this story as well. The parts of it that are autobiographical are, he actually had a son who is in prison. I think he was recently paroled. The narrator in this story refers to his youngest son, or his youngest brother, and his son both having committed murder. Readers who followed Wideman's career know that both of those things are sadly true. In 1986, at the age of 16, Wideman's son Jacob killed another teenager and was only recently paroled, and Wideman's brother Robert is serving a life sentence in prison for murder. So he blends in a lot of his own personal history with his writings as well. One of the things that they discuss about his writing style, what I could find about it, he writes in a what is called a jazz riff style. I thought it was hard to read. It was run-on sentences. It was clipped. It was this is not the way I was taught to write when I was in high school or in college, that each paragraph needed to have a plot line and then surrounding sentences support that plot line, and then you go to the next, main idea of that paragraph. Instead, this was almost like reading one long fractured paragraph, and from the critics, you either love it or you hate it, and I didn't love it, so that means I hated it, and I did. The writing was fractured, the words are excised, reflecting vernacular speech patterns, and also Wideman's aim at getting more quickly to the truth. So if you look at it as maybe he was writing in a jazz style, like musical jazz, maybe it would make more sense if you're into jazz, I guess. Anyway, I can't stand it. It drives me crazy. I just want to use proper grammar. I want to use verbs. I have a hard time following it. I'll just read you one section, and there were a lot of things that I could pick, and there go the dogs again. I know y'all are going to miss that. I'm going to let them outside to bark. You want to go outside? Sorry about that. They're outside now, so maybe I can get through this. There were a lot of sections I could have chosen, but this little section I read and I thought, what? It's on page 400, and he's talking about his family history of violence. And he says, my father's son, my youngest brother, convicted of felony murder. And years later, my son received a life sentence at 16. My brother, my son, still doing time, and my father's imprisoned son's son, a murder victim, and a son of my brother's dead son, just released from prison a week ago. And I'm more than half ashamed. I don't know if the son, whose name I can't recall, of my brother's dead son has fathered son or daughter. My guess is the rumor of a child true, since if my grandnephew was old enough for adult prison, he would be way past the age many young colored men fathered babies back home. It's confusing. And I think that's part of the reason that he wrote the story, and the plot of this story is maps and ledgers, and he's trying to make sense of his family's history. And his family's history is confusing. And so I guess that means that the writing style is also kind of confusing. In this story, he talks about his mother and his grandmother. Those are just parts that are kind of woven in, and they're a little more poetic, especially when he talks about his grandmother's handwriting. I thought that was, had some merit to it. But then he'll talk about his Aunt C, who was able to get his father out of prison or out of trouble for the first murder, and evidently he committed another murder later on and was put in prison. So anyway, it was confusing, to say the least. And so I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, only because you can pick out things that you liked about it. Maybe there were parts of it that you found redeeming and you would like to share those. Feel free to email. I just had a hard time getting through this story. And in the end, you realize that he's plotting all this out and trying to make sense of it with his sister. That this is actually kind of a letter written to his sister. So it was almost like he was saying, now, did I get this right? To his sister. So maybe that makes sense to you. What we get out of this story is just the power of family, in positive and negative. There's always the black sheep of every family, whether they are white or they are black. And how do you carry that burden? Should you carry that burden? One of the things in the Bible that always strikes me as just almost unbelievable is how when Jesus called his disciples and they dropped everything, including their families, and followed him. And I've always thought, could I do that? Could I just drop everything, including family, and follow Jesus for a greater call? And I'm sure you had that personal experience that Peter and John and all the disciples had, then that would make a difference. But when you look at it from a perspective of now, I don't know that I could have done that. I don't know that I could have been quite that obedient. That was a lot to ask of the disciples, and yet they did that, and thank goodness they did, because they knew that they had a higher calling. That's kind of what I'm going to leave you with today, is to think about what is your family's relationship, how does that help you? How does that hinder you from doing the work of God? Just thinking about that in general. I know sometimes we carry our family's burdens, and they shouldn't be our burdens, but we do. So just think about that. Think about your family in regards to your Christian life and to your calling, and how you can understand that and yet still receive your calling. And really, that's all I've got for this time. And I hope that you've enjoyed this. I know it's not the same. I miss you guys, and I miss I miss pizza. I miss the smell of pizzeria and even the loud music. And those days are coming. I know that we'll be together again, and we'll look back and say, remember that pandemic? In the meantime, everybody stay safe, be well, and we'll talk to you soon.